we covered the perspective about the operating system. What is operating system? We came to know there are several operating systems. Then it is a platform. It is a kind of interface between hardware and the end user. This we covered in the last class. After that, we covered the history of OS. Means what are the various history when it originate when the first OS is formed. This all we discussed in the last class. Then we talked about what are the market share of the various operating system. We found Android and the Windows are the two major market players in the case of my this operating system. Then we talked about what are the various operating systems: batch, multiprocessing, multitasking, real time, distributed network, and mobile. So we covered till this portion, and after that we talked about the features of OS, and also we talked about the advantages and disadvantages of OS. So this is what we covered in the last class. So now today's class is very important to understand what is kernel in operating system. So what is kernel in OS? The kernel is an is an central component of central computer operating system. The only job performed by the kernel is to manage the communication between the software and the hardware. What it means, I'll tell you. A kernel is at the nucleus of the computer. It makes the communication between the hardware and the software possible. With while the kernel is at the innermost part of the operating system, a shell is the outermost one. So what is this kernel? Let me show you with this example. See, this is an operating system, and in operating system, when it is talked with the hardware, it is done with the help of the kernel. And when it talked with you and you, the terminal, it is done with the help of shell. So kernel is the we may say it's a part of a operating system uh, through which it will communicate with the hardware. And similarly, the shell is a part of the operating system through which you can talk with the terminal or the user. So this is what a kernel exactly is. Now feature of the kernel is the low level scheduling of the process. It is help for for scheduling of the processes, inter-process communication, process synchronization, and context switching. So these are the features of the kernel. Means what it is used for. It is meant for making a low level scheduling of the process, inter process communication, and process synchronization, and context switching. So now based on the existence, the types of the kernel is classified into two. One is what we call monolithic, and another is what we call microkernel. Now what is monolithic? As the name suggests, monolithic kernel is a single code block of a program. It provides all required services offered by the OS. It is a simplistic design which creates a distinct communication layer between the hardware and the software. So it is a single layer, kernel, a single code block, which is used for to communicate with the operating system and the hardware, to make the communication between operating system and the hardware. So now, what is the macro kernel? Macro kernel, on the other hand, is the all manages all the system resources. In this type of kernel, services are implemented in different address spaces. The user services are stored in the user address spaces. Services are stored in under the kernel address spaces. So it helps to reduce the size of the both kernel and the operating system. So this microkernel is basically is a kind of it's a type of a kernel which manages all the system resources. Means all the system resources means all the other peripherals which are connected with the systems. And in this type of kernel, services are implemented in the different address spaces. Means for every every resource there is a different address space for that particular resource. So the user services are stored, means the services which is asked by the user are stored in the address spaces, and kernel services which need to be performed with the help of to the microcontroller, means the hardware, are stored by the kernel address spaces. And it helps to reduce the size of the both kernel and the operating system. So these are the two types of kernel. Now let's talk about the firmware and the OS. These are the two
Excuse me,
very.
sir.
Just wait. Just talk about the two terms very important: firmware and the OS. Now what is firmware and what is operating system? Now firmware, sometimes we call firmware as an operating system, but it is little bit different. How? Firmware is some it's a sort of operating system which is comes when the device is manufactured. Means the firmware is a kind of programming that embedded on a chip in a device which control that specific function at the time of its manufacture. So firmware is a program that can encoded by the manufacturer of that IC or something that can't be changed, and it is stored in the volatile non-volatile memory. So this is firmware, which is sometimes when we go and buy some sort of microcontroller or motherboard, it is come with some inbuilt program. That inbuilt program which is embedded into that at the time of manufacturing is what we call firmware. On the other hand, OS is what? OS is something which we add into the means after the once we purchase a new system, the operating system is installed by us. So operating system OS provided the functionality over and above which is provided by the firmware. Means firstly the firmware is installed by the company or a manufacturer. After that, on that processor we install our operating system, so, to do work like Windows or DOS or the Unix. So OS is a program that can be installed by the user and can be changed, and OS is stored by the on the hard drive. So this is the important difference between firmware and the operating system. Firmware is also called lightweight OS basically, and it is installed at the time of manufacturing. This is very important. And firmware is updated by the company only whenever they have a provision of updating it firmware, but it is a critical kind of update which is provided by the company only. So the company like Intel or the manufacturer of that particular board, they provide this firmware updation. So and to fix some bugs basically. So I mean to say, if you said कि like firmware is a, अगर आप ये कहते हैं कि firmware जो है वो एक it is not going to be changed, no. So firmware change होता है, चेंज नहीं होता, बेसिकली अपडेट होता है और उस अपडेट को हम लोग सिस्टम के अंदर परफॉर्म कर लेते हैं. ऑन द अदर हैंड ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम जो है वो तो आपको पता ही है, ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम जो है वो फर्मवेयर के ऊपर डाला जाता है. मीन्स फर्मवेयर तो आता ही आता है सिस्टम में, उसके साथ हम ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम डालते हैं टू डू आवर फंक्शनैलिटी. सो दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. नाउ कम टू द लास्ट टॉपिक, a very important topic. What is the difference between 32-bit and 64-bit OS? See, earlier 32-bit, as the name suggests, it requires 32-bit data processing simultaneously, and it allows 64-bit data processing simultaneously. So 32-bit machines are there, and 64. Earlier we used 32-bit machine, and because company immediately not switching to the 64-bit, they simultaneously produce both kind of machines, 32-bit and as well as 64 bits. Then nowadays what will happen, everyone have we have a 64-bit machine, not 34-bit machine. Earlier there is a problem also for the software makers or programmers. They made a program for the both the machines, 32-bit as well as 64-bit. So 34-bit applications require 34-bit OS. This is very important. Earlier it was 32-bit applications are there, but nowadays everything, every game, every operating system, they are made, they generally made it on 64-bit. So this is one of the reason why people they get rid of their old computers and go for a new computer, because the earlier computers they work on 32-bit. But nowadays every computer is obviously the speed is also an issue. So 64-bit everyone is working on nowadays 64-bit. So it requires a 64-bit OS CPU. And system level, yes, earlier Windows 8, Windows 7, Vista, XP, Linux, these are coming in both 32 as well as 64-bit. But nowadays XP, Professional, Vista 7, Mac OS, Linux, they all are coming in 64-bit. So 32-bit system are limited 3.2 GB RAM, but here 17 billion GB of RAM, 64-bit. So this is one of the advantage why people are using 64-bit. So okay, if you want to check the which machine you have, you simply go to the folder, means the your my computer, like here the desktop, and this PC, and right click on it and go to the properties. So once you go to the properties, it will show you your system information. Like here I am using Intel Core i5 Right away, I am using Intel Core i5 having 8 GB of RAM, and you see 64-bit operating system I am using. So this is what I'm. You can check your own operating system as well. What kind of I am tell you how. देखिए आपको करना क्या होता है, आप क्या करिए, अपने दिस पीसी पे चाहिए, दिस पीसी कैसे मिलेगा, फोल्डर्स पे चाहिए, कहीं पे भी चले जाइए, दिस पीसी पे जाके आपके सिस्टम पे आइकन भी हो सकता है, उस पर राइट क्लिक करिए। मेरे में ये आ रहा है शो मोर ऑप्शन, शायद आप में ना आए। जब शो मोर ऑप्शन हो जाएंगे तो प्रॉपर्टीज आएगा, प्रॉपर्टीज पे आप क्लिक करिए। इस तरीके से आप जब भी अपनी कंपनी में किसी कंपनी में काम करने जाते हो या कहीं भी जाते हो तो पहले चेक करो कि भैया आप कौन से सिस्टम पे काम कर रहे हो। ये मेरा गेमिंग लैपटॉप है, G3 3500 उसकी उसका वर्जन है, i5 है। और इस तरीके से आपको सबको चेक करना चाहिए कि आप लोगों के कंप्यूटर का वर्जन क्या है। कोई भी बंदा आपसे पूछ सकता है आपके कंप्यूटर के अंदर कितनी रैम इंस्टॉल्ड है, तो आप ऐसे करके राइट क्लिक करके आप देख सकते हैं। आप अभी भी अपने अपने सिस्टम की चेक करिए क्या सिस्टम में कितनी कितनी रैम है। सो दिस इज ऑल अबाउट today's class. So let me ask you a questions. Before that, let me stop recording here.